So that was a very, very exciting quarter-final number 1. Now on to our second quarter-final. The subject or the topic is COP26 has failed in moving the global fight against climate change forward. When I first heard of COP26, I thought it was a film starring Akshay Kumar and Anupam Kher. But I was wrong. Okay, let's call in our contestants for the quarterfinal, the second quarterfinal. We've got Adeetya Jain, runner-up North Zone from Vibgyo High, and he's for the motion. And against the motion, we've got Arvind Iyengar, runner-up Thane Zone, Bombay Scottish School, Powai.
Let me begin from a quote from the Honorable Secretary General of the United Nations at the COP26. He said, "Our fragile planet is hanging by a thread. We are still knocking on the door of a climate catastrophe. It is time to go into emergency mode, or our chance of reaching the net zero goal will be itself be zero." I would personally like to thank him for repeating what the whole world is saying for a long time. He even further reiterated that many of the goals in past climate conferences were not successful due to the lack of spirit and collectiveness and collaboration due to separate interests. Sounds so hysterical that the Secretary General himself is suggesting the failure of these conferences, where leaders around the world come in black suits just to take pledges and make commitments made of words. Empty words. Will this forward a cause for climate change? Moving on to my arguments. My first one will be on the emphasis on youth participation. Along with that, no signs of experts on climate change giving any input at the COP26. The COP has turned into a PR event where leaders are giving beautiful speeches and announcing fancy commitments and targets, while behind the curtains, governments of the global north countries are still refusing to take any drastic climate action. The last few lines were of Greta Thunberg. She was literally protesting when COP26 was in session. I'll let you all consume the irony for a moment. That a renowned climate change activist was protesting against a climate change conference. But even more seriously, she expressed the motives of wretched leaders at COP26. No action, but only media appearances. Seems like these leaders are waiting for another climate change blow. I really wish that all these leaders in COP26 could have spent more time in inviting a few important people who can actually provide good advice on climate change than debating upon what royal foods need to be served to these so-called esteemed leaders. Another statement from a youth climate who actually attended COP26, Lena Gobel from Germany, left the conference as she stated it was a room with people in suits trying to look important and felt there was no point in being there. Can you understand the situation here? Will this forward a cause for climate change? Now the second argument is the political lobbying in such conferences like COP26. Now to elaborate the argument, I would like to bring forward the point that that just before the COP26, a leak of documents were exposed by many media channels which stated that countries are pushing back UN recommendations for actions on climate change. Few countries like Saudi Arabia, Japan, and Australia are among countries asking the UN to provide down the need to move rapidly away from fossil fuels. It also had details that countries are not ready to provide funds to poorer countries who are willing to shift to greener technology. So what can we analyze from this? What can we analyze from this? How is the conference even helping? I wonder if these are really leaders or just black mask at risk of being counter-repetitive. Will this forward our cause for climate change? Here's the truth. We love making pledges at fancy conferences, but not any change. But here's our solution. Few days after the COP26, there was an open summit which involved climate activists, climate change experts. These are people who were like, we can do this today, we can do that tomorrow for climate change. They just do not paint merry pictures. Public must support them as they deserve support. One final request: rather than wasting money for comfortable chairs for our leaders at COP26, please use the money to fund ideas from climate change activists. First, solve the climate change issues in your country before moving to play politics at a world stage. Thank you.
As much as we hate to hear it, There is no quick fix. There is no painless or easy solution. There's just moving forward. But don't you feel it too? The panic and frustration rising in your gut when you realize, oh my God, we're going to die. Well, the Conference of Parties is here to prevent just that from happening, the decision-making body responsible for the solutions to climate change. I will be presenting my arguments for the COP26 in 3 segments: the challenge, the wins, and the future. Everyone has known for decades that fossil fuels are the main cause for global warming. So shouldn't a ban be obvious? This trillion-dollar industry belongs to the joint sector, so any decisions have to be agreed on by powerful multinational corporations as well as the government. But neither of them are the reason for the delay, so there's no point in antagonizing them. Not like the world leaders have a one-way ticket to Mars to escape with when the sea levels start rising. The reason we can't solve the problem is that we cannot ban fossil fuels. It will cause every single industry to come to a standstill, and against the popular belief, they cannot be replaced by renewable sources. Because there are too many applications of fossil carbons, and even a hypothetic transition will be decades long and pricey. Planting trees does help, but it's just a temporary stopgap. So the only foolproof method is to decarbonize fuels. But at a larger scale, it gets really expensive, and we all know how we get when it comes to the money. This is why the COP's task is not that simple, because the issue isn't linear and has a lot of moving parts. Now, having understood the challenge, here's what happened at the COP26. The Glasgow Climate Pact is a historical document, not only being the first explicit mention of fossil fuels in UN documentation, but also countries went from denying the role to agreeing to phase down emissions. India, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria set targets to reach net zero emissions, while countries joined a pact to stop financing of fossil fuels abroad. A major loophole in the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement was closed, and a global pledge to cut methane emissions by 30% was signed by 110. Even after all of this, why does COP26 seem like a failure? As desperation rises across the globe, we expect a master plan to solve everything with the wave of a wand. There are a few diplomatic meetings in the world as painful as the COPs, as they require consensus of about 200 nations, some rich, some poor, some petrostates, some already carbon neutral, and negotiations get ugly. We don't see all that goes on backstage with the tedious contracts, costly dealings, and relentless parleying behind every tough decision. Although the follow-up on the Paris Agreement may have been disappointing, but the last 2 years of the pandemic threw all of us off the target, drastically changing priorities for countries. So instead of simply criticizing them, we must answer the statement in question. Has climate change been solved? No. Has global warming stopped? No. But has there been progress? Definitely. The undeniable evidence is right in front of your eyes. Finally, I would ask everyone around the globe to continue to keep their hopes intact, as there is no giant step that does it. It's just a lot of tiny steps, and we still do have a chance at escaping extinction by the skin of our teeth. Thank you.
Aditya, very well spoken.
Okay.
The question that I have for you is that if take as drastic a stand as you're suggesting, then big contributors to climate change like India and China, if the drastic implementation that you're suggesting were to be undertaken, then they would get off the table because they're not able to control and make such strong commitments at this point, as the change is gradual. They can make the change. Isn't it better that we have them at least at the table rather than exclude them altogether?
Just to answer the question about gradual change, just to say that the targets which were met in the which were so-called to be met in the 2015 Paris conference were not met. Now I'm not saying that we must just judge by past records. Here's the thing: if there are better alternatives, I talked about an open summit which had renowned climate activists, and why not give them money there? If you really want to make impact, even if not a gradual change, if there's an option of moving on a fast pace and just not making our hopes intact but also doing something, some field work, then I would say that our money is better spent there, isn't it? And all this money is taxpayers' money. Let me remind you that all these fundings are taxpayers' money, and they should feel that there's some impact. There's smoke in Delhi, so I'm just not deliberately. I'm just not deliberately stating that these leaders are not doing anything, but they are not doing anything drastic because they did not take any opinions from other people. They did not take any proud concession in making some really good commitments. All these commitments we make, 2030 carbon emissions, these are hypotheses. But who is doing the field work? Those climate activists who are right now there making new innovations. Rather than just stating about few commitments and just asking for a whole lot money and some media appearances, I would rather say that we fund those innovations and see what real impact that makes on a very much of a national basis. Thank you.
My question is to you, Arvind. You told us that COP26 brought us recognition of the fact that fossil fuels are a problem and that gradual change is better than no change. But the alternative to COP26 would not have been no change. The alternative to COP26 could have been countries taking independent action, taking bilateral action, or sponsoring and funding events like an open summit like the one that Adeetya suggested. Could you explain or could you respond to the idea that COP26 has distracted us from better solutions and prevented us from taking better action?
So, about independent and bilateral action, not all countries have the economic capability of performing, like, for example, the country of Seychelles or Maldives, the delegates and head of states of whom were there at the summit. They are unable to do anything about the rising sea levels, as they are neither the top contributors of carbon emissions, neither do they have the economic capability to take any measures. Hence, global cooperation is necessary, because if we don't have everyone at the table, we can't address and make real change. Because if we have to make gradual change, it must be at a wide level. Gradual change at a microscopic level, it won't make any difference. And about the Open Summit, I actually, as he mentioned, Greta Thunberg was present in Glasgow, and there's a very interesting part of her speech. She did mention and criticize leaders on how, without any having no undecisive action, but when asked about a decisive action of plan of action, she said that is none of my business. She said that a plan of action to save her country is none of her business. What we see in media is not really the reality. These activists and protesters may not have actual solutions, and maybe they're just doing to create awareness, which is a plus point. It is definitely a plus point, but having an open summit will just end up in utter chaos. We can't objectively note down the points at such a large level, at a global level. Even with having the head of states of 200 countries, it was really hard to organize. And having an open summit will not really make any difference. Thank you.
And have a result waiting for us.
We thought the motion fails and Arvind from opposition is making it through to the semi-final.
That brings us to the end of this round. Moving on to the next round, the quarterfinal 2.